These are my top 10 most underrated cards in the new Spacetime Smackdown set. So let's go ahead and jump right into it. Now, this list is not in any particular order, so even though I go through it first, it doesn't mean that it's the number one most underrated card on my list. So just keep that in mind. So the first card is going to be Skarmory. Skarmory is a card that is a basic Pokemon, 80 HP, and has the ability, or not the ability, the attack Metal Arms. If this Pokemon has a Pokemon tool attached, this attack does 30 more damage. So this means it does 50 damage for 1 Steel Energy. All you gotta do is attach it with a Giant Cape or a Rocky Helmet, and this thing can chunk for 50 damage on your turn 1, the first turn that you can attack. So if you are going second, and if you draw a Skarmory and a Pokemon tool, this thing puts on a lot of early pressure. If you put on a Rocky Helmet especially, right, they're not going to be doing too much damage to you, and you're going to be putting on 70 damage onto the board. So this is like really good early pressure, and its retreat cost is only 1, so it's not super expensive. So that's why I think Skarmory is a very underrated card right now. The next card on my list is Giratina. I think this one is overlooked heavily right now because its retreat cost is super high, as well as its attack is 3 energies and only does 70 damage. But its ability is that if this Pokemon has an energy attached, it has 0 retreat cost. It's very easy to attach an energy onto Giratina and allow it to just pivot in and out of the active spot. So it's a pretty good basic Pokemon that can tank damage early on if you are playing a deck that needs time to set up. So I think that Giratina is very powerful, as well as it does not need to be psychic energy at all. So it could be any type of energy and it will have no retreat cost. You can attach some more Pokemon tools like, a Rocky Helmet so that you can deal some damage as well when it's in the active spot and your opponent is trying to pressure you. So you can lay on some passive damage and, utilize Cyrus, to good effect. So Giratina, I think, is pretty underrated as well. Next up on this list is Electrode. Electrode is a stage 1, 80 HP Pokemon for electric type decks. So we already had an Electrode in the format, but it did 70 damage, so this does 20 damage less, but it costed 2 energies in order to attack. This one is only 1 energy for 50 damage. This is very similar in damage to Weezing, and Weezing, when you go first, is a very powerful card, allowing you to poison and deal 30 damage plus 10 damage from poison on your second turn going first. So I think that this is a very good card going first. So in Pikachu decks, I think that you might want to replace your current Electrodes if you are using Electrode with this one. The only issue with this Electrode is that it no longer has free retreat cost. It now costs 1 retreat in order to move it back into the bench, so that is a downside. However, I do think that it makes it up because 50 damage on turn 2 going first is a lot of early pressure. Next up on my list is Mismagius EX. 2 energies, Magical Delusion, 70 damage. Your opponent's active Pokemon is now confused. Confusion is a new card, or I'm sorry, not a new card, a new status effect in Pokemon TCG Pocket. And in this version of the Pokemon trading card game, instead of dealing damage and failing the attack, it just fails the attack, and your opponent also does not automatically recover from the status condition if they flip heads. They stay confused. So this is really good pressure, and it pretty much forces your opponent to switch. So if you confuse your opponent's active Pokemon and it's their main attacker, they might want to consider switching that active Pokemon out, giving you an extra turn to, concoct whatever game plan you need to concoct. This is pretty good at dealing some decent damage. 70 is not terrible, and just stalling out turns and just in general being really annoying for your opponent. So I do think that Mismagius is pretty underrated right now because Confusion is a pretty decent status effect just because of the fact that it does not automatically recover unless I believe you're using the Lumberry or you retreat. Now someone let me know down in the comments if maybe after a certain amount of turns you recover from Confusion, but I don't believe that is the case. I've never actually been confused long enough to find out if that's true. So next up on my list is the Stage 2 Empoleon. Its attack is Aqua Jet, has 150 HP, 2 retreat costs, but its attack does 80 damage and then also 30 damage to one of your opponent's bench Pokemon. So 110 damage altogether, and 80 is pretty strong, and 30 is also very powerful for sniping because a potion will not recover all of that HP, meaning that this card uses Cyrus to very good effect. Being a stage 2 and having 2 retreat costs is its biggest downside, however, but water type decks have been getting a lot of energy acceleration lately, so I think that kind of mitigates its 3 energy cost. And then also with Pokemon Communication, making stage 2 decks a little bit more consistent as well. So I think that Empoleon is currently very much underrated, and I would love to see some Empoleon decks that use it to good effect. Next up on the list is a Rampardos. It is a stage 2, starting with your Fossil, and then stage 1 Cornidos. It's 150 HP, excuse me, and its attack is Head Smash for 1 fighting energy. It's crazy strong, under 30 damage. If your opponent's Pokemon is knocked out by damage from this attack, this Pokemon also does 150 damage to itself. Now, I do think that 130 is a little bit unfortunate because it just barely misses the mark on a lot of EX Pokemon that have 140 HP. So this requires a Giovanni in order to one-shot a lot of those Pokemon. But it's 1 energy for 130 damage, which is absolutely crazy. And I think if you combine it with some spread damage Pokemon, maybe even like a Spiritomb or something, maybe you can like get some crazy knockouts. Or you combine it with, I don't know, like a Weezing and Poison, something like that. But some kind of spread damage, you know, when they get scared after taking a hit from Head Smash and living, and then just sniping them off the bench. I think that's how you're going to want to play Rampardos, because the 50 damage of recoil that you take if you knock out the Pokemon is a lot. So I think we want to be avoiding that as much as possible, unless you can like secure the game with the attack. Then of course it doesn't matter. So I think that Rampardos is currently underrated, and I'm sure we will see some testing on this card very soon enough. Next up is Luxray. It is also a stage 2, 130 HP. It has free retreat cost, which is pretty nice for a stage 2 Pokemon. And its attack is Volt Bolt. Discard all lightning energy from this Pokemon. This attack does 120 damage to one of your opponent's Pokemon. So that means you can do 120 damage to anyone on the bench and anyone in the active spot. It does require you to discard all lightning energy though, and as it stands right now, there isn't really great energy acceleration onto lightning Pokemon, except in the form of Magneton, which generates it for itself, but you can't move it around unless you're using the Dawn card. And then of course we have the Volkner card, which can accelerate lightning energy from the discard pile. The problem is getting energy into discard pile like quickly is its biggest weakness. Right now, I believe there's only 2 reliable cards that can discard energy from itself, and that's going to be Raichu from the base set, the Genetic Apex, and also Magnezone, but it only discards 1 energy, but it's a stage 2. So it takes a while in order to us to discard lightning energy so that we can use Volkner. That's the problem currently, I think, with this card, but I still do think that this card is underrated, and it can be pretty good if we can find a way to reliably discard lightning energy and use Volkner. Next up on the list is Yanmega EX. This is a grass type Pokemon, stage 1, 1 retreat cost, and the attack Air Slash, 120 damage. For 3 colorless energy, discard a random energy from this Pokemon. Now the reason why I think this card is underrated is because 120 damage for 3 colorless means that this card is splashable into any deck. 120 damage also is the same damage as a freaking Machamp, and that's a stage 2. So this is some pretty good damage, and with Darkrai and Dark decks becoming more and more popular, Yanmega EX can hit for weakness into those types of decks. So that means you should probably consider splashing Yanmega EX if your deck struggles against the new Darkrai decks that are rising in the meta currently. So Yanmega, I think very underrated, but I think people are starting to notice that this card is actually pretty freaking good. Next up on the list I have is Gliscor, 1 energy acrobatics. So this card is another great going first card. If you draw both the Gligar and the Gliscor in your hand and you go first, your attack acrobatics is able to do some crazy amount of damage. And also combine this with Lucario, this deck is super powerful going first. It's like super aggro, super quick, but of course you have to draw all those pieces in order to get it. This is a deck that wants to like evolve fast and early, so this does require Lucario to go on along with it. But right, if you get all those pieces and you're going first, this card is really good. And you know, going first is typically not that great, and so I think that the developers of the game started making these evolution cards for only 1 energy, so that going first doesn't feel as terrible, if you understand what I mean, right? This allows you to attack and evolve on your turn 2 if you go first. So this card I think is really great if you are going first. Now, those are my top 10 most underrated cards, but I also have some honorable mentions that I want to go over. The first one that I have for you guys is the Fan Rotom. Spin Storm. Flip a coin. If heads, put your opponent's active Pokemon into their hand. So this is going to be frustrating if your opponent plays a stage 2 deck. Basically, they have to evolve all of their Pokemon all over again, and so it sets them back 2 turns basically. And if they accelerated any energy onto that Pokemon, all of it goes away. So yeah, that can be very annoying, and it's 2 energy cost, and so if you perhaps pair this up with a Dialga, it gets charged up in 1 turn, so that's not bad. And so yeah, this is like a different version of Aerodactyl, a little bit easier to get online too because it's a basic Pokemon. So Fan Rotom definitely underrated as a honorable mention. Next up, I have Per Ugly. It's a stage 1. Its attack is 3 energies. It's the interrupt attack, which does 60 damage, and your opponent reveals their hand. Choose a card you find there and shuffle it back into your opponent's deck. This is a crazy form of disruption, and it can be very annoying to play against. So this is a control type deck that I think might start to see popularity soon enough when paired with a Dialga. Dialga is really great for Pokemon that have 3 energy costs. It cuts down the charge time for them by 1 turn. So very popular, or very good, I think, in my opinion. Next up, we have Lopunny, stage 1, 1 energy, jump kick, 20 damage, and then 20 damage to one of your opponent's bench Pokemon. So another really good going first Pokemon. If you get Buneri and Lopunny in your hand on turn 1, you can evolve it on turn 3 or your turn 2 and start, putting on some decent pressure onto your opponent's active Pokemon as well as their bench. And they need to be able to respond to it as quickly as possible. Otherwise, they're going to start taking a lot of chip damage and eventually just lose the game. And then my last honorable mention is the Steel type Wormadam, 110 HP, 1 retreat cost, Iron Head attack for 2 metal energy, does 50 damage, and flip a coin so you get tails. This attack does 30 more damage for each heads. So this is a Misty, pretty much the effect is the same as Misty, so if you get really lucky, you can start chunking for a whole lot of damage, but of course, if you get unlucky, you're only dealing 50 damage. 50 damage for 2 energies is not super amazing, but it's also just not terrible either. 110 HP is also pretty good. It survives a lot of attacks because there's a lot of attacks in the game that just do 100. So you survive all of those attacks. So yeah, I think Wormadam is one of the better versions of all the other Wormadams we got in this set. So definitely, I think this one's underrated. I think you can definitely build, maybe not a meta deck, but at least a playable deck with this card. Anyway guys, so those are the top 10 cards that I think are underrated in this set. And with that said, I did mention a lot of cards that are good going first, and so I think that with this set, they noticed that going first felt kind of bad because you couldn't really do much, right? You could only load up your bench, you can't even attach energy, you can't attack, you literally can't do anything, right? So I think that with this set, they tried to make going first a little bit stronger by making these stage 1 Pokemon with just 1 energy. Anyway guys, let me know what you guys think down in the comments below, and until next time, I'll see you guys in the next one.